How long does it take to register an RIA? That is today's question on the Transition to RIA question and answer series. It is episode number 146. Hi, I'm Brad Wales from Transition to RIA, where we help you understand everything there is to know about why and how to transition your practice to the RIA model. If you're not already there, start out by heading on over to transitiontoria.com, where you can find this entire series in video format, podcast format. There's articles, there's white papers, there's a vendor profile series, all kinds of things to help you better understand the model. Again, transitiontoria.com. Okay, in today's episode, we're going to be talking about how long does it take to register an RIA. So I want to give you a little kind of preface to that, and then we'll kind of walk through the logistics and the timeline you should expect with that process. So just as a reminder, and it's something I've talked about on episodes like this before, before you even get to worrying about, hey, how long would it take me to register an RIA, you first need to make sure that that is the right path for you. So as a quick reminder, again, those of you that have watched many or listened to many of my episodes will know there's kind of two precursors before you maybe get to that point. So the first one is, should you even be going down this path, right? Is the RIA model right for your practice? Whatever you hope to achieve by transitioning to the RIA model, is that going to come to fruition? Are you correct about your assumptions of how it will work and how it will impact your economics and the flexibility you'll have? And you need to understand how that works. And again, that's a big part of what I do is say, okay, where are you now? What kind of model are you in now? What kind of firm are you at now? What would this RIA path potentially bring to you? And is that a fit to be explored? So you first have to make sure it's a fit. And then the second kind of step in that process at a macro level is to understand that there's three main pathways into the model. So on one end of the spectrum, which is what we're going to be talking about on today's episode, is where you start your own RIA and build out the necessary solution providers around it. On the other end of the spectrum, you potentially might join an RIA. And there's all different kinds of flavors about what that entails. And then there is a kind of a third option that's it's a bit of between those two, kind of oftentimes a supported independence type approach. But the idea being it's important to understand what those three pathways are. They all have pros and cons. They're different for different advisors. We'll find one path appealing and seemingly similar size tenured advisors might choose the exact opposite path. So don't go into this with some assumption that you're only going to do it one way. You want to educate yourself on how all these pathways work and conclude which one is best for you. So if you have done those two macro steps, and if you have concluded that starting your own RIA is the right path to take, then that leads us to today's question again: how long does that process take? Now, as a clarification, what exactly what we're referring to of register an RIA, keep in mind what an RIA is. So some folks, I'll hear advisors that are already in the RIA model, and they'll either verbally or on their website or whatever, and they'll say, I am an RIA, talking first person. I am an RIA. Well, I get what they are trying to say, but that's not the factually correct way to be describing it. That would be like saying I am a McDonald's. No, you might own a McDonald's, you might run a McDonald's, but you, the individual, are not a McDonald's. So that is the same thing with an RIA, a registered investment advisor. The RIA is the entity that is established, in the advisors, yourself being one of them, is an IAR, investment advisor representative of the RIA. Now, you wouldn't, just because it's so much jargon and the typical client doesn't understand, you wouldn't go around calling yourself, I'm an investment advisor representative, I'm an IAR. Again, most of the investment public doesn't necessarily know that jargon. But just to clarify, it's also not factually correct to call yourself as a person an RIA. Again, you could say you own an RIA, you run an RIA. But so the process of registering an RIA is creating that legal structure, that legal entity, of which, once that is then established, the advisors underneath it can register with that RIA to then provide the advisory services to that RIA's clients, that financial advisor's clients. So just keep that in mind of what we're talking about. We're talking about registering the entity. So as far as the timeline and steps involved in that, a couple things. Anyone that's going through this process, again, did all their homework and they're now transitioning their practice to the RIA model, keep in mind that register in the RIA is just one of many variables that you're going to be working on, usually simultaneously. So when we're talking about, okay, well, how long does it take to register the RIA, in which we're going to answer, keep in mind that's just one of about a dozen things you potentially need to be working through. And again, a lot of those are being done in parallel. Some are more prioritized towards the front end, and others can wait towards later in the transition process. But there's multiple variables to be working through. So just because register on the RIA takes X number of days, which we're going to get into, keep in mind that assumes that you have the capacity to perhaps work through it at that pace, because you're also working on other things as well. Not to mention, of course, you still have your, as I say, proverbial day job as a financial advisor to work with your clients and your team members and everything. So there's a lot of moving parts. I don't say all that to intimidate you by any means. That's a big part of what I help you do, is understand what those parts are, understand the priority you should be managing through them, help you through it all. So you do not need to be intimidated by it, but it is fair for me to point out there are multiple steps. Register in the RIA is just one of those steps. So the first thing to kick that process off to register an RIA is to identify and hire a compliance consultant firm. Now, there's no regulation out there that says you have to hire someone to help you get the RIA registered. In theory, you could try to go online. The system's called the IARD system, and attempt to create your own ADV, part 1 and part 2, and know how to do the filing. You would be crazy to attempt to do it on your own. There's no reason for you to try to do it on your own. If you're not willing and able to pay a compliance consultant firm to do this, you probably shouldn't be making the transition. This is just the type of thing you cannot afford to do incorrectly. You cannot afford to screw it up. And quite frankly, you'll probably only ever make one, or you only register one RIA in your life, so you're never going to get good at it. So you engage, typically referred to as compliance consultant firms, to help you with that process. And so that's the first step to be able to register one, and something you got to factor some time into this to answer the question, how long does this take to identify and hire a compliance consultant firm? And the reality is, and this is a good thing for our industry, but it also creates a challenge because you need to sort through it. There are quite a few compliance consultant firms out there now that help with register and RIAs. Depends on your particular circumstances. Some will be a fit and others won't be a fit. Or maybe your situation's fairly simple and you don't need the super high-end, super expensive version. The more mid-tier range will kind of accomplish all that you need. And so step one in that process is knowing that you need to hire a compliance consulting firm, knowing who the players are and knowing which ones might be a fit for you, and then doing some due diligence, talking to a couple. Again, I can help you with all that, get all that figured out, and then engage in a compliance consultant firm. So that process alone, again, when we're factoring time, can take some time. Now, if you come to me and you say, Brad, with all your experience, here's everything about my practice, ask as many questions as you want, Brad, just pick one for me. With my experience, I'm confident I can do that and would do that well for you. But generally, because this is usually going to be a vendor that you're working with for a very long time, because they don't just help you with the upfront registration, you generally always engage that same compliance consultant firm on an ongoing basis to help you maintain the RIA and manage your compliance responsibilities going forward. So that is a big decision to pick that vendor. Again, you're not marrying that vendor for the balance of your career. You could change them down the line. That is a little bit disruptive. So to the degree you can avoid that, just pick the right one on the front end is better. And so that generally does take some time. But hiring that compliance consultant firm is kind of step one in that. So after you've hired them, and again, we're just talking about the getting the firm register on the front end. We're not talking about, it's beyond the scope of this episode, what that ongoing compliance support looks like after you've actually launched the RIA. That is an important topic, but again, beyond the scope of this episode, so I'm not going to get into it. But after you've engaged and hired a compliance consultant firm, there's now 2 steps that are going to occur after that. The first step is that compliance consultant firm needs to learn about you, your practice, your clients, how you plan to invest, because perhaps it might be different from how you've historically done it, the kinds of services you plan to offer, how you plan to charge your clients for your services. And again, part of the beauty of going down an RIA path is you get a bit of a blank slate. So just because you've done it one way in the past, which oftentimes is because that's how whatever firm you're at now requires you to maybe only do things a certain way, you have generally always more flexibility on an RIA path of how the value prop you want to put together for your firm. So the services you're going to provide, how you price it out, all those sorts of things. And so the first thing the compliance consulting firm needs to do is to get that information from you. And that typically involves a questionnaire that they send you that goes over many of these variables involved. After they get that, they then start drafting up, among other things, the ADV sections, part 1, part 2. That takes a little time on their part as well. And then they get a draft or two of that ready, and then that goes back to you. You're reviewing it. You're jumping on phone calls. You're talking things through. And so that back and forth takes a little time. Now, if there's ever kind of an emergency rush situation, which is not ideal, but sometimes there's circumstances where these things need to be attempted to do as quickly as possible, which you'll notice in a minute, that no matter how much effort's put into it, there's still some hard minimum time involved in this. The compliance consultant firm can attempt to do this back and forth as quickly as possible, but under a more normal situation, it typically takes several weeks, even just at a reasonable pace, to kind of go back and forth. And again, a lot of that's dictated by your ability and your team's ability to respond to the question, fill out the whole question and respond to it. Also, when they send you drafts, you have to have, the capacity to sit through and look through the drafts and then get on a phone conversation and start talking this through. So again, all while you're doing your proverbial day job. So the first step in that is the actual back and forth. Now that will get everything up until the point where the compliance consultant firm says, okay, we've done all of our part here. Now we are ready to send it off to the regulator. And this is all mapped out. This is all choreographed to coincide with when your projected launch ideal target period is. So they don't just willy-nilly send it off. This would have been thought through in the context of, okay, well, when are you desiring to go live with your new firm? And so, hey, let's map out when we would be sending it off to them. But when that point comes, they then send it off to either the SEC or state. It's primarily comes down to the size of your firm as to whether you'd be SEC or state. There's a couple other unique circumstances that could decide it as well, but it's generally speaking, if you have 100 million or more in client assets, AUM, you would be SEC, and below that you are generally state. And so when they send it off to the state, then it's out of the compliance consultant firm's hands. It's out of your hands. You are now, for lack of a better term, at the mercy of the regulator to turn that around and provide that back for you. And as I'll talk about here, that can vary some. So that's step 2, and then you're waiting for that to come back. And the idea is, again, you've mapped this out that when it comes back, and sometimes it comes back and there's additional questions that are being asked, but either via with questions asked or it essentially is gone live. At that point, you've choreographed all the other variables you're working through as well. At that point, you typically resign shortly thereafter and launch your new firm. So again, you map all this out. It's all choreographed. So all together, I usually tell folks, hey, how long does it take to register an RA? And again, I define that as when you actually hire the compliance and consultant firm. So again, there's work that you've already had to expend or time you've already had to expend just to get to that point. But by the time you're hiring them, I typically say 45 to 90 days is what that takes. And the reason there's that range is because of those two parts. So again, it matters that first end, you going back and forth with the compliance consulting firm, it matters how quickly you do your part. It matters how quickly they do their part. And again, that you guys have some degree of control over. If we needed to try to move this along quickly, that you can try to pull late nights or whatever and get a lot of that done. But then that second part where it gets sent off, then you're at the mercy of the regulator. So I typically say 45 to 90 days, but to give you kind of some more clarity on that is if you are going to be SEC registered, from when the compliance consulting firm sends it off to the SEC, they are statutorily required to respond within 45 days, but almost like clockwork for several years now, it's always possible it could change in the future, but almost like clockwork in every instance, again, unless there's some hiccup that occurs, they respond at the 30-day mark. And again, you would have mapped it out to know that. Your compliance consulting firm would be pointing that out to you as well. And you'd say, okay, hey, So if I want to launch my new firm 30 days out from now, that now is the time we're going to send it off, because we can generally anticipate it coming back from the SEC 30 days out. Again, is I don't want to say clockwork, is probably too strong, because it could be variances, but that is pretty dialed in most of the time. If you are state registered, unfortunately, there's much more variability with that. Every state has different kind of turnaround times. They're generally not shorter than the SEC. You can generally expect at least 30 days. And unfortunately, I have heard of some states that sometimes take months, 2, 3, 4 months to get their part done. And so the part of this process is, if you're going to be state registered when you're talking to a compliance consultant firm in whatever state you're in, and you've identified, either just because you're aware of it or they've coached you on it or I've coached you on it, that, okay, you're going to be state registered, you could ask them and say, hey, compliance consultant firm, with your experience in my state of, whatever state you're in, how long are you typically seeing that turnaround time take? And again, unfortunately, it's all over the place, so it would be very specific to your situation. But hopefully that's kind of helped you realize everything that goes into just getting to this point where we're talking about register an RIA, then the steps involved, there's more to it. I'm trying to keep this high level, but the things that could either speed this up or slow this down. And hopefully you're realizing, again, that there's certain blocks of time here that cannot be decreased even if you want them to be. So you cannot come to me and say, Brad, let's pull an all-nighter, tell me everything I need to know so I can launch an RIA in 10 days from now. That's not going to happen. There's parts that are out of our control. We can try to, the stuff that we can control, we try to do as quickly as possible, but the regulator review part is out of our control. There's no way to speed that up. And again, in some cases, it's typically at least 30 days, if not 30, 60, maybe 90 days, depends on your circumstances. And so the final point I'll just make is from a overall time perspective, just to give you an idea, beyond just register an RIA. Typically, when an advisor team is first reaching out to me to have a conversation, they've at least kind of thought about this RIA model. They've maybe watched some of my videos, listened to podcasts. And so to use a baseball analogy, we'll say they're in the first or second inning already, right? So there's some interest there. Hey, let me look into this. By the time they're reaching out to me, and by the time I walk all through the steps involved, again, from, hey, let's make sure this is even something you should be exploring. Hey, let's understand all the pathways into it. Hey, depends on which pathway you've chosen. Here's all the variables and pieces you need to solve for. That typically takes 6 to 9 months at a good measured pace. Now, it can be done significantly quicker than that, particularly if you're maybe joining an RIA as opposed to registering a new RIA, then that can really reduce the time. And then there's other circumstances where sometimes these things do get stretched out several years, and that could be due to professional or personal reasons on the advisor or team side that time it might make more sense to do it 18 months from now or whatnot. But if there's no kind of artificial things slowing things down, or there's not a reason to delay it, typically, for what it's worth, if you're curious, from when someone's first reached out to me to when they're actually making the change, going live with it is typically 6 to 9 months, just to give you a little perspective. So with that, like I said, my name is Brad Wells with Transition to RIA. This is the sort of thing I help advisors with all day long, and say, hey, should you even be going down this path? Does it make sense for you? What are the different ways you could do it? And then how do each of these steps work? What kind of vendors might you rely on? How do you pick one vendor over the other? How much time is going to be involved in this? What are the costs involved in all this? You don't need to be intimidated by any of this, because this is what I help you through. I walk you through, depending on which path we conclude is best for you, and let's put all the pieces in place. This is a methodical process that has been massaged over many years and decades. So you're not out there, charting new territory here. It's just, okay, what are the best practices of how best to do this? And let's navigate those steps and walk you through it. Happy to have that conversation with you as well. First things first, though, head on over to transitiontoria.com, where, as I said, you can find this entire series in video format, podcast format. There's articles, there's white papers, there's a vendor profile series, and at the top of every page is a contact link. Just click on that, and you can instantly and easily schedule time to have a one-on-one conversation with me, whether you want to talk about today's topic or anything else RIA related. I'm happy to have that conversation with you. Again, transitiontoria.com. And with that, hope you found value in today's episode, and I'll see you on the next one.